So imagine waking up one morning. The sun is shining, your coffee maker is doing its usual rhythmic beep in the kitchen, but
Just a totally normal day.
right, exactly. But there is this heavy, completely unnatural silence settling over your entire neighborhood.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you walk outside, expecting to hear cars or dogs, and instead you realize millions of people have vanished just without a single trace.
That is, that's just terrifying.
It really is. And it's not just random adults either. It is mostly children. Like the local elementary school is just empty.
Unbelievable.
So, in the midst of this absolute chaos, as society is essentially free falling into a global panic,
Yeah.
you find a document waiting for you on a table. And it's explicitly written for this exact terrifying moment.
Right, because it's the ultimate rupture of reality. We are talking about a sudden, inexplicable paradigm shift that leaves whoever is left behind to navigate a world that is fundamentally broken.
Yeah, both practically and psychologically.
Ex-
And that is exactly the scenario we are tackling in today's deep dive. We're unpacking a really fascinating, highly intense source document titled To the Ones Left Behind.
It's a heavy read for sure.
Very heavy. Our mission today is to explore this survival guide. The author claims to have written this before, this theoretical mass disappearance event, what they refer to as the Rapture.
Right.
We are going to dig into its stark warnings about the immediate aftermath, its blistering critique of the modern church's spiritual failure, and the very specific, gritty tactics it provides for surviving an era it calls the Great Tribulation.
And just to set the stage properly for you listening, our goal here is to explore the concepts, the framework, and the theology presented in this specific document. It's an objective analysis of the source material.
Absolutely.
We are not endorsing any specific theological viewpoints, political stances, or religious doctrines. Instead, we're examining this as a fascinating psychological and practical roadmap.
Yeah, we want to understand the intricate, high-stakes world the author has constructed for you, the listener, in this unimaginable scenario.
Right, because it really is a whole world they've built here.
Okay, let's unpack this, diving right into the text. The document actually begins by looking backward.
Which is interesting given the emergency.
Right. It focuses heavily on how things got to this catastrophic point and why the vast majority of people were just completely unprepared. The author spends a significant amount of time examining their own life before the disappearances took place.
Yeah, and it reads as a really raw, vulnerable admission.
It totally does. They talk about facing massive, coordinated opposition just for sharing these warnings. They lost friends, they lost fellowship, their credibility was totally destroyed.
People in their own circles were calling them like a false prophet, right?
Yeah, a false prophet, a date setter, cultic, and a troublemaker. They became, in their own words, a cautionary tale of gross deception.
They were entirely ostracized by their own community.
Right.
But, what's fascinating here is how the author diagnoses their own initial reaction to this severe pushback.
Oh, the moral cowardice thing.
Exactly. They admit to discovering a new weakness within themselves, which they term moral cowardice. They realized they were terrified of confrontation.
Right.
They wanted peace with their peers way more than they wanted to have uncomfortable conversations about what they deeply believed was an impending global crisis.
See, I really have to push back on that term, though, or at least view it through a psychological lens.
How so?
Well, is moral cowardice really the fair phrase to use here, or is that just basic human nature? How often do we all prioritize social comfort over our deepest convictions?
Oh, all the time. Constantly.
Right. It is incredibly isolating to be the one person in the room saying the sky is falling when everyone else is just trying to, enjoy the appetizers.
Yeah, nobody wants to be that guy.
Exactly. It sounds to me like the author was acting like a modern-day whistleblower who gets canceled by their own community just for speaking an uncomfortable truth. The pressure to stay quiet, fit in, and keep your job or your friends must have been completely overwhelming.
You are entirely right. It is completely human nature to want to be invited to the dinner party. We are social creatures. We're wired for belonging.
Exactly.
But the author argues that what we comfortably label human nature, heaven labels moral cowardice when the stakes are eternal. And they actually engage with that exact tension you were bringing up.
Yeah, they do go pretty deep into that.
They really do. The text details a period of deep repentance and surrender to overcome that exact social pressure. To dismantle their fear of rejection, they had to completely reevaluate the community they were trying to please.
Right, by bringing in the book of Revelation.
Right, they did this by comparing their modern church to the 7 churches mentioned in Revelation.
So, For those of us who aren't biblical scholars, how does that comparison actually work? Like, what is the significance of those seven churches?
Well, in the book of Revelation, there are letters addressed to 7 early Christian churches, and 5 of them receive severe rebukes from Christ.
Oh, wow. 5 out of 7.
Yeah, not a great track record. And the author of our document draws direct parallels between those ancient failures and the modern church they were a part of.
Okay, that makes sense.
For instance, one ancient church believed it was spiritually alive, but Christ declared it dead. Others were criticized for being lukewarm or, for tolerating sexual immorality, abandoning their initial devotion, or compromising with false teachings just to appease the surrounding culture.
So it was all about fitting in with the culture.
Exactly. The author looks at their modern peers and realizes that, much like those ancient churches, the people around them loved the present world, their 401ks, their social status, their comfort, far more than they loved the idea of Christ's return.
That reframing makes a lot of sense, honestly. Once the author fully accepted that the church community they were desperately trying to please was, in this theological framework, spiritually bankrupt,
Right.
the fear of losing their approval probably just evaporated.
That is the pivotal psychological shift. They traded the desire for social acceptance from a compromised system for a singular focus on standing alone with Christ.
Wow.
Yeah, and that internal transformation is what changes this document from a mere warning into an urgent, desperate lifeline for whoever is left behind.
And the urgency kicks in immediately because, in the narrative of the document, the warnings were ignored. The event has happened.
Right, there's no going back.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The author suddenly pivots from discussing their past to addressing your immediate, terrifying present. The departure of Christ's people has occurred.
Yeah, the tone shifts drastically.
It really does. And then the author drops what I honestly think is the most jarring, visceral detail in the entire document.
Right.
Most children have been raptured. They're just gone.
It is an unimaginable, horrifying scenario. The text explicitly acknowledges that this mass vanishing of children will throw parents into nightmare trauma.
I mean, how could it not?
Exactly. The societal grief would be totally incalculable.
And yet the author's advice to those grieving parents is incredibly harsh. They say, don't look for them. Make peace with realities stranger than fiction.
Which is brutal to hear.
It's beyond brutal. They basically say, you were warned, you didn't listen, now you have to accept it. Reading that, I was just stopped in my tracks.
Yeah, it's a gut punch.
As a human being, as a parent, that is an impossible ask. You would claw the earth apart with your bare hands looking for your kid. So what does it say about the level of danger in this new post-rapture world that this is the author's primary foundational instruction?
Well, it's an absolutely agonizing thought. As a human, your biological instinct is to search forever, right? But from a purely practical survival standpoint, the author is arguing that this instinct will literally get you killed.
Because the world is that dangerous now.
Exactly. They are prescribing a radical psychological detachment strategy. The author says, grieve if you must, cry if you must, but do not surrender your soul.
Wow.
Yeah, they are acknowledging the profound, messy human tragedy, but they are drawing a hard line against paralysis. To survive what is coming, you just cannot afford to be paralyzed by denial or a futile search for the missing.
Because the environment has fundamentally shifted.
Right. The time for conventional grieving is a luxury of peacetime. This is wartime triage.
The escalation here is just massive. Pre-rapture, the greatest test of faith the author faced was just ridicule. It was skeptical friends, scoffing churches, people laughing at your hope and calling you a troublemaker.
Just social pressure, really.
Right, but post-rapture, the test is what the text calls the Great Tribulation. You go from being laughed at during a dinner party to being actively hunted by a totalitarian global regime.
Like a completely different reality.
Yeah, the new enemy is a world that openly rejects God, bullies believers, and actively tortures them to death.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, think of it like a massive atmospheric shift in physics.
Okay, I'm with you.
When a massive high-pressure system suddenly vanishes, a violent storm rushes in to fill the void. This document is describing a sociological vacuum. Millions of people, including children, are just gone.
Right.
Throughout history, sudden vacuums of power, combined with massive societal trauma and panic, almost inevitably lead to the rapid rise of authoritarianism.
Because people are terrified.
Exactly. People will trade any amount of freedom for the illusion of security. The text outlines how this specific void is filled by an absolute terrifying global system.
Yeah.
It describes a time of immense pressure where the new regime utilizes deception and total economic control to enforce conformity.
So, what does this all mean? Looking at the tactics the author suggests, it reads almost exactly like an off-grid prepper manual, but with incredibly high spiritual stakes.
So, absolutely.
Because if this new totalitarian government is using economic control to enforce conformity, they are going to use the grid to track you.
Precisely. The practical tactics laid out are highly specific and remarkably grounded in that reality. First and foremost, the author warns against depending on digital systems.
Because they can be monitored.
Right. They say the communications will inevitably become controlled, monitored, or outright interrupted. You are advised to preserve physical, analog copies of the Bible.
Which is such a specific detail.
It is. And if remaining in a large city means you cannot obtain basic necessities without compromising your faith, the explicit instruction is to flee and seek safer, isolated places.
It really gets into the dirt under your fingernails advice. The author tells you to learn specific, life-preserving off-grid skills immediately.
Like what specifically?
Well, they say you need to know how to find and purify clean water, how to grow your own food, how to preserve those harvests for the winter, basic first aid, repairing simple hand tools, making shelter, and cooking with very limited food.
I mean, that is literally survival.
It is. But what fascinates me is how intertwined all this physical preparation is with its spiritual practice.
Right, they aren't separate things in this text.
No, but you have to memorize scripture while you still have access to it, so it cannot be confiscated from a digital device. You need to build a community, share food, protect the weak, and care for widows and the sick. This isolation is breakthrough.
Which is very true psychologically.
Yeah. And then there is the ultimate non-negotiable rule. Do not take the mark of the beast and refuse to worship anyone except Jesus.
We really need to look at the mechanism behind that specific rule. The mark of the beast is often portrayed in pop culture as just a scary symbol. But in this theological framework, it functions as an absolute economic chokehold.
Right. It's about control.
Exactly. The concept is that you cannot buy or sell. You cannot access banking, grocery stores, hospitals, or the power grid unless you pledge allegiance to this new global leader and receive this mark.
Wow.
That is why the off-grid skills are so vital. If you can't grow your own food or purify your own water, you will be starved into submission. The regime uses your biological need to eat to force your spiritual compromise.
So the physical skills are essentially a defense mechanism to protect your spiritual integrity. You learn to fix a water filter so you aren't forced to take the mark just to get a drink of water.
Yes, exactly.
But there is a fascinating duality here. The author is deeply pragmatic about the biological realities of hunger and exposure, yet physical survival is framed as completely secondary to spiritual survival.
That is the core paradox of this entire survival guide. The greatest victory, according to the text, is not surviving at any cost.
Which goes against every biological instinct we have.
It does. But they argue your body can be destroyed, but your soul belongs to God. If the government demands worship, you refuse. If lies become law, you hold to the truth.
Right.
Survival is only framed as valuable if you remain faithful. The instruction is incredibly stoic. If you have to take the mark of the beast to get food for yourself, you choose starvation instead.
That is just, I mean, that's incredibly intense. But let's be realistic. No matter how many off-grid skills you learn, how well you preserve your harvest, or how effectively you hide in the woods, you can't hide forever.
No, eventually they find you.
Right. Eventually, the totalitarian regime is going to catch up to this community. What happens when physical survival is simply no longer an option?
Well, the text deeply prepares the listener for that exact inevitability. You might lose your home, your career, your freedom, and ultimately your life.
Yeah.
To bolster the emotional fortitude required for this, the author heavily leans on historical and scriptural precedents. They remind the reader that Joseph suffered betrayal and unjust imprisonment before he ever ruled in Egypt.
Okay, pulling from history.
Exactly. They point to Daniel, who survived exile in a pagan empire and was thrown into a lion's den because he openly refused a state mandate that forbade praying to God.
Right. That parallel is very clear.
They also bring up Jeremiah, the weeping prophet who warned of death nation for decades and was imprisoned for it, which heavily parallels the author's own pre-rapture experience. And of course, the early apostles who were imprisoned and executed rather than deny Christ.
The overarching message seems to be that their hope was never built on physical comfort or political stability. It was built entirely on resurrection.
Yes, precisely.
The text emphatically states that a physical prison cannot imprison Christ, and a physical execution is not the end of the story.
Exactly the point the text makes.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads to a command that requires a profound psychological shift.
Right, because then comes an instruction that just absolutely floored me. Picture the scenario. You are facing execution. You have lost everything. Your children vanished years ago.
Right.
Society has hunted you down, stripped you of your rights, and now they're going to kill you. And the author's instruction is, do not hate your persecutors.
Yeah.
Pray for them, forgive them, refuse bitterness, refuse revenge, and refuse despair. I mean, it is one thing to read a manual on how to purify water with charcoal. It is an entirely different universe to look at your executioner and actively forgive them while they take your life.
It is almost incomprehensible.
It really is. The author even suggests that the hunter today may become the believer tomorrow.
This raises an important question. How does human being maintain that level of radical forgiveness in the face of absolute tyranny?
I have no idea. How do they?
It requires completely redefining the concept of victory. In the world's eyes, if you are stripped of your possessions, marginalized, imprisoned, and executed, you are utterly defeated. The regime has won.
Right. Game over.
But the author is telling the listener that if heaven calls you faithful, then death has already been conquered. The physical destruction of your body is just a doorway.
Wow.
That is why the document ends with that final, triumphant promise in all capital letters, the Lamb wins. It is a reminder that the kingdoms of this world, no matter how terrifying, absolute, or technologically advanced they seem in the moment, are strictly temporary.
The empires will fall, but the faith remains. So let's take a step back and look at the intense journey this source material just took us on.
It's been a ride.
Seriously. We started with an author crying out in the wilderness, facing mockery for warning a modern church that had grown completely complacent, caring more about social standing than spiritual readiness.
Right, the moral cowardice phase.
Exactly. We then move through the visceral, unimaginable shock of the vanishings, the nightmare trauma of losing children, and the brutal necessity of immediate psychological triage.
Yeah, abandoning the search.
Right. And finally, we explored the gritty, high-stakes, practical survival tactics required to endure the Great Tribulation, tactics that are entirely meant to support your spiritual endurance, culminating in a call for radical forgiveness even in the face of martyrdom.
It is a profound exploration of human endurance, belief, and the ultimate cost of conviction. By detailing this extreme scenario, it forces the reader to confront their own breaking points and to establish their core priorities before any crisis even arrives.
Which brings this entirely back to you listening to this deep dive right now. Even if you are just going about your normal Tuesday, commuting to work, picking up groceries, and you are not actively prepping for a global tribulation, this document serves as an incredibly powerful thought experiment.
It really does.
It forces you to ask yourself a hard question. What do you value most? If society suddenly stripped away your comfort, your career, your social standing, and all your digital conveniences, what are the core convictions you would absolutely refuse to compromise? Who are you when the safety net is gone?
It strips away all the noise and distraction of modern life and asks what truly remains when only the absolute essentials are left.
That leaves us with one final lingering thought for you to mull over today. The author of this guide heavily emphasizes memorizing scripture and preserving analog knowledge because they warn that digital systems will fail, or worse, they will be weaponized and controlled by a hostile regime. We live in a hyper-connected, cloud-based world right now in 2026. We outsource our memories, our navigation, our contacts, and our knowledge to our phones. So if all the digital information, the networks, the cloud, the apps, and the tools you rely on every single day simply vanish tomorrow morning, what essential life-sustaining knowledge have you actually stored in your own organic mind that absolutely nobody could ever take away from you?